The salt air should have tasted like freedom that afternoon. Maya's little hand warm in mine, her suitcase bumping my knee, our yacht Aurora gleaming at Seadrift Cove like a promise finally kept. Instead, I turned the corner of slip 14 and felt my stomach drop. Strangers swarmed my deck. Silver trays, folding chairs, a vinyl banner flapping where my wife once polished mahogany by lamplight. And at the gangplank stood Victoria Crane, our HOA's self-crowned queen barking orders in a hot pink blazer waving a rulebook I knew was counterfeit the moment it touched my face. Community asset, she said, as if my private Marina slip were a park bench. Maya's voice went small behind me. Grandpa, who are these people? I didn't shout. Coast Guard years teach you this in a storm. The first life you save is the one watching your eyes. I walked her back to the car, then returned to the dock with something colder than anger. Resolve. Victoria thought she owned the rules. She forgot I owned the ground. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. When I came back to the dock alone, the laughter was louder. Victoria Crane had found her rhythm, clapping her hands, rearranging tables, and barking at the caterers like a Broadway director 2 hours from opening night. The sea breeze carried the smell of champagne and arrogance. I'd seen storms form at sea that moved slower than this woman's ego. My boots hit the planks of the Marina, each step controlled. Years in the Coast Guard had trained me to master my pulse even when the waves wanted to swallow me whole. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just watched. The duffel bags of ice stacked against the gangway. The loudspeakers perched beside the compass my father gave me in 1972. The fake HOA event permit taped to the helm of my own boat. I climbed the first step of the gangplank. A young man in a vest, probably one of her hired temps, put up a hand to stop me. "Sir, guests only," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Son," I said, keeping my voice, "even this entire marina is private property. You're standing on my dock and that's my yacht. So unless you can teleport, you're about 5 seconds from trespassing." He froze. Victoria spun around, irritation flashing like lightning. "Oh, Mr. Hale," she said, drawing out my name as if she'd been expecting me. "You didn't RSVP." I stared at her. "Because I didn't need to. It's my boat." She smiled, tight and sharp. Slip 14 is common access under our revised HOA guidelines. You'd know that if you attended meetings. We've reserved the Aurora for the HOA Summer Gala. Her words bounced in my head like echoes in a steel hull. Common access, revised guidelines. I'd written the first bylaws of this property before she'd ever set foot here. Every slip had a private deed. I had it locked in my safe, yet she stood there waving a clipboard like it was a royal decree. "You mean you forged a guideline?" I said. Her smirk deepened. "Call it community initiative." Behind her, Maya's sun hat sat crushed near a folding chair. I picked it up slowly, brushing off the dirt. "Do you even realize," I said quietly, "this trip was for my granddaughter. She just finished her last chemo session last week. We were going to see dolphins." For the first time, Victoria hesitated. Her eyes flickered, maybe from guilt, maybe from surprise, but then she blinked it away and squared her shoulders. "I'm sorry for your situation, but the board approved this weeks ago. You can file a complaint through proper channels." I took one long breath. "Victoria," I said, "you've just turned the wrong man's dock into a battlefield." I turned and left before she could respond. The trick to winning a fight isn't shouting the loudest, it's knowing when your enemy has already overplayed their hand. That night I sat in my study, surrounded by silence, the kind that hums right before a storm breaks. My wife's photograph sat on the bookshelf beside the blueprints of this very marina. We'd built it ourselves 20 years ago, every piling, every inch of steel framing. When she passed, I stopped caring about the paperwork. Let the HOA handle their meetings, I'd thought. They couldn't touch what was mine. I was wrong. I poured a cup of black coffee and opened the old safe in the corner. The heavy door groaned like an old friend. Inside were the deeds, maps, and the original master lease from the county archives. My fingers traced the embossed seal. Section 4, Clause 12. Marina slips designated as private property, not subject to common area reclassification. The language was clear as daylight. Karen, or Victoria, as she called herself now, wasn't just wrong. She was criminally wrong. At midnight, I logged into the county database and cross-checked parcel numbers. Every file confirmed it. The marina was under my name, separate from the residential parcels. The HOA had no jurisdiction, no access, no rights. Yet their emails showed otherwise mass invitations for HOA Gala at Seadrift Marina. I drafted an email to the property management company Baystar Management attaching the documents. I expected outrage. Instead, I received silence. The next morning, I called. A receptionist with a voice smoother than oil answered. "Mr. Hale, I understand your concern," she said in that corporate monotone that means we don't care. Vice President Crane filed the appropriate forms for community event usage. "Everything appears in order." "In order," I repeated. "She broke into a private marina, used a private yacht, and made my granddaughter cry." "You think that's in order? I'll escalate this to our regional office," she said quickly. "Expect a follow-up within 10 business days." 10 business days. By then, my patience would have sunk to the ocean floor. I hung up and stepped outside. The morning sun glinted off the calm water. For the first time, I didn't feel peace looking at the marina. I felt invasion. My phone buzzed a message from Mike Travers, the electrician who'd worked here since day one. "Captain, you might want to see this. HOA's posting new rules by the gate. Says Marina is for all residents." He sent a photo. There it was, a laminated sign zip-tied to the entrance, declaring the marina a shared community resource under HOA covenant revision. That was the last rope snapping inside me. By noon, I was back at the dock pulling off their plastic sign. I could hear faint music echoing from a distance, leftover noise from Victoria's party. The smell of spilled wine lingered on my deck. My wife had varnished that railing by hand. I ran a thumb across a dark stain and felt something twist deep in my chest. I took a photo of the damage and sent it to my insurance agent. Within an hour, he called. "Jonah, we've got a problem," he said. "Someone filed a claim yesterday from your address, a slip and fall during an HOA community event. They listed you as the property owner liable for injury." I gripped the phone tighter. "What? Yeah," he said. "Apparently someone tripped near your boat. If this goes through, your premium could triple." So they weren't just trespassing, they were setting me up for liability. Clever in a snake-in-the-grass kind of way. That night I watched the marina from my porch, the waves reflecting the faint light from the docks. Somewhere a frog croaked. The peace that once defined this place felt violated. Victoria thought she'd won a victory by hosting a party on my deck. She didn't realize she'd just declared war on the man who built this entire shoreline. Because while she was waving her clipboard, she forgot one crucial fact: I never sold the land beneath her feet. The tide was about to turn. The following week, I learned exactly how deep Victoria's illusion of power went. She wasn't just a loudmouth with a clipboard, she was a strategist in heels, weaving lies through every bureaucratic crack she could find. Monday morning, I received a letter taped to my front gate, printed on HOA letterhead. "Official Notice of Common Property Violation," it read. "The accusation: unauthorized signage obstructing community access to marina facilities." In other words, she was fining me for removing her illegal banner from my own dock. The penalty was $1, $200 payable within 10 days. I almost laughed until I saw the fine print at the bottom. "Failure to comply will result in suspension of access privileges and potential lien action." A lien? On land I had owned outright for nearly 2 decades. That wasn't just arrogance. That was an act of war. I called Baystar Management again, this time bypassing the receptionist and going straight to their legal department. A woman named Donna Chang answered, her tone polished but wary. "Mr. Hale, we understand this has been frustrating for you," she began as if soothing a child. "Frustrating?" I said, gripping the receiver. "Your client forged a rulebook and threw a party on my property. She's issuing fines for a violation that doesn't exist." "Vice President Crane has board authority," Donna replied. "According to our amended covenants, amended by who I snapped. There hasn't been a legitimate quorum in over a year." Silence. Then the soft sound of paper shuffling. "I'll email you the relevant documentation," she said. 5 minutes later, an email arrived with an attached PDF. I opened it and nearly choked. The so-called board meeting minutes were a single page, typed in 12-point Times New Roman. The meeting date a Sunday afternoon. The attendees: Victoria Crane and Sharon Holt, her best friend and self-proclaimed architectural chair. The vote: unanimous approval to reclassify marina slips as common area for community events. 2 people, 2 signatures. No public notice, no posted agenda, no approval from property owners. I printed the document, red-marked every false line, and placed it beside the original deed from my safe. The contrast was like night and day legal ink versus counterfeit words. That evening, I walked to the marina again. The sunset turned the bay gold, but my chest was tight. The once peaceful water now looked like a reflection of the battle lines forming beneath it. I noticed a group of residents by the clubhouse patio, whispering, glancing toward me, then quickly looking away. Karen's propaganda was working. The next morning, Mike Travers came knocking. His hands were stained with motor grease, his eyes filled with quiet concern. Cap, you'd better see this, he said, holding up his phone. It was a Facebook post from the HOA's community page. A photo of me standing near the dock taken from afar captioned, "Certain individuals threatening HOA property and staff. Please report any suspicious behavior to Vice President Crane." I felt my blood go cold. Suspicious behavior, I muttered. Owning my own land. Mike sighed. She's got people scared, Jonah. They think she can revoke leases. Folks don't know what's real anymore. I rubbed a hand over my face. Then it's time to remind them. That afternoon, I drafted 3 certified letters, one for Victoria, one for the HOA president, and one for Baystar Management. Each was formal, precise, and deadly in tone. I cited breach of master lease, unauthorized commercial activity, and trespass under California Civil Code 1008. I demanded immediate cessation of all HOA events on private property and restitution for damages. Then I mailed them return receipt requested. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it might end there, but 3 days later, my mailbox overflowed with flyers, bright red, glossy, and dripping with manipulation. "Concerned residents, are you safe?" the headline blared. Beneath it, a grainy photo of me from an old newsletter captioned, "Local property owner threatens HOA board, refuses to follow community rules." At the bottom in small print, authorized by Vice President Crane. I stood on my porch clutching one of the flyers, while neighbors across the street hurried inside their houses. Even the Andersons, who used to wave every morning, shut their blinds when I looked their way. That evening, Mike came over again, visibly shaken. "She's having the Millers and Rodriguez's boats towed," he said. "What Y says their decorations violate Marina standards. But everyone knows it's because they spoke to you last week." I followed him down to the dock. 2 empty slips gaped where the boats used to be. In their place hung laminated orange tags, towed for noncompliance. The Millers were good people teachers with 2 kids. The Rodriguezes retired Coast Guard like me. Seeing their spaces empty was like staring at open graves. "She's using fear," I said quietly. "Divide and isolate. It's classic control." Mike nodded grimly. "You think the cops'll help?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Not without proof." That night I went through my old security footage. The Marina's cameras were still wired into a private feed I'd installed years ago. I scrolled through the archives frame by frame until I found it. Victoria hosting yoga classes on another man's boat, HOA volunteers collecting event fees, and Brad Kessler, her pet enforcer, patrolling in tactical gear like some suburban stormtrooper. The next day, I emailed the footage to Baystar. No response. Hours later, another message appeared on the community board. "All communications from Mr. Hale are to be ignored pending legal review. Residents are advised not to engage." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that startled even me. It was almost impressive how far she'd gone. A web of deceit wrapped in HOA stationery. That evening, as the sun sank behind the pier, I heard the sound of metal clanging. Bill Anderson, the old Marine, was lowering his flag for the night. I walked over. "Evening, Bill," I said softly. He nodded, his expression tired. "They fined me today," said my flagpole's an unauthorized modification. 15 years I've flown it. Never a problem till now. I clenched my fists. She's targeting veterans now. Figures. He gave me a sad, knowing look. "You gonna fight her, Jonah?" I met his gaze. "No, Bill. I'm going to bury her with paperwork." That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by piles of documents. Deeds, blueprints contracts the skeleton of the community I had built from the ground up. And hidden among them, a single folder I hadn't opened in years, the original master ground lease filed under my name and witnessed by county officials. I flipped through the yellowed pages, tracing the ink like an old scar. There it was, paragraph 7. "All improvements upon said land remain under the sole authority of the lesser, Mr. Jonah Hale." The HOA wasn't my landlord, they were my tenants. Victoria Crane had declared herself queen on land that was never hers to rule. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. This wasn't a storm anymore. It was a coup. And I had the map, the law, and the patience to take back every inch she'd stolen. The next battle wouldn't be on the dock. It would be in the records office, the courthouse, and the bank. Because when a bully thinks she owns the water, the best revenge is reminding her who controls the tide. The next morning I was up before sunrise. Years in the Coast Guard had built a rhythm I could never quite shake, the kind of instinct that pulls you out of bed when something's wrong in the current. This time the storm wasn't offshore. It was right beneath my property line. Coffee in hand, I laid out every document I had on the dining table like tactical maps before a mission. The original master ground lease, the deed, the Marina blueprints. My late wife Anna used to tease me about being too methodical, but it was that very habit that now stood between order and chaos. Clause by clause, I reread the 8-year-old lease I'd signed with the management firm that preceded Baystar. I'd written parts of it myself, back when I still believed in cooperation and good faith. The contract was ironclad. The HOA was a tenant, not a co-owner. Their authority extended to landscaping, community maintenance, and utilities, not private moorings or marina operations. Any modification to property classification required a landowner's notarized approval. I was that landowner, and I had never signed a thing. At 9 a.m., I called a friend from my Coast Guard days, Commander Evan Pierce, now working as a real estate attorney in Monterey County. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 5 years, but he picked up on the first ring. "Jonah Hale," he said, chuckling. "You still waking up before the gulls, old habits," I said. "Listen, Evan, I need help. HOA problem. A big one." 10 minutes later, he was silent on the other end, scanning the digital copies I'd just sent him. Then he whistled low. "Jonah, this isn't just a nuisance. What they're doing qualifies as contractual fraud." "You still have the original signatures in the safe," I said. "Then they're dead in the water. But don't rush a lawsuit, not yet. Let's flank them. Quietly." That word flank was all I needed to hear. The plan began forming like a tide chart in my head. The first step was surveillance. Mike Travers helped me set up new high-definition security cameras around the marina, this time feeding directly into my private server. Not the HOA system, not Baystar's cloud. Mine. Every walkway, every access gate, every slip. Within 2 days, the footage painted a damning picture. Victoria Crane had turned my marina into her personal stage. Friday evenings, wine and wellness nights. Saturdays, HOA board yoga retreat. Sundays, community market on the dock. And every time I saw her standing in that pink blazer, champagne in hand, acting like the admiral of someone else's fleet, what infuriated me most wasn't the noise or the trespass. It was the disrespect. The way she'd lean against my yacht laughing with guests, tossing her hair as if she'd earned the salt in the air. Then came the breaking point. Monday afternoon, my insurance agent Billy Sanderson called again. "Jonah, I just got another notice," she said. "Someone from the HOA filed a commercial liability claim under your name, says you hosted recurring public events at the marina. That's going to nuke your premiums unless we resolve it immediately." I gritted my teeth. "Billy, those aren't my events. They're being run illegally." She sighed. "Then we'll need written proof of your ownership and control. Otherwise, under state code, liability defaults to the landholder of record, which, to be fair, is you." That's when it hit me they were using my own ownership against me. She was building a paper wall, a web of official filings that could tie up my assets for years if I didn't move fast. I called Evan back. "We need to act," I said. "They're creating a paper trail. I want one stronger." His tone sharpened. "You still own the land under every structure right, every square inch." "Then we don't sue them," he said. "We buy them. Or rather, you buy the debt under their feet." It took me a moment to understand. "Their mortgage, exactly," he said. "If the HOA's corporate entity holds a property loan, which it does, we find the bank make an offer and quietly transfer that note to an LLC under your control. They'll never see it coming." I smiled for the first time in weeks. A silent coup. Evan chuckled. More like lawful repossession. For the next few days, I became a ghost with a mission. I pulled county finance records, HOA filings, and public mortgage data. Sure enough, Seadrift Homeowners Association Incorporated carried a commercial loan from West Shore Bank secured against the clubhouse, the parking lots, and community utilities. Their balance wasn't massive, roughly $3.4 million, but they'd missed 2 payments this quarter. Evan's firm handled the rest. Within 72 hours, we'd created Harborlight Holdings LLC, a clean shell company with a registered office 3 towns over. Through it, we offered to purchase the outstanding HOA loan quietly in full. West Shore accepted almost immediately. For them, it was just moving a headache off their books. For me, it was the ultimate checkmate. When the transfer papers arrived by courier, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope. Inside was a single document with a sentence that ended the war before it even reached court. "All payments, liens, and obligations owed by Seadrift Homeowners Association Incorporated are now payable to Harborlight Holdings LLC." In plain English, every HOA fee, every mortgage payment, every cent of their supposed authority now flowed straight to me. But I wasn't done. The same afternoon, Evan filed a termination of leasehold agreement with the county clerk, citing 8 separate breaches: unauthorized commercial events, misappropriation of insurance coverage, defamation of landowner, and willful property. damage. By the letter of the law, the HOA's management rights were now void. Their authority existed only in Victoria's imagination. I didn't send an announcement or an email, I just waited. 3 days later, Mike came jogging up my driveway, laughing so hard he could barely talk. "Cap, you gotta see this," he gasped, holding up his phone. It was footage from the Marina. A group of residents stood outside the main gate, confused, because the lock system no longer responded to their old HOA keycards. On the gate hung a new sign, sleek and silver: private property, access revoked, trespassers, subject to Penal Code Section 602. Behind the gate, Victoria stood fuming, shaking the bars like a caged animal. "She's losing it," Mike said, "screaming that you hacked the system." "Not hacked," I said, reclaimed. That evening, I walked down to the waterfront. The sun was dipping low, staining the water orange. I could see her from a distance, pacing near the clubhouse in furious disbelief. The same woman who had humiliated me in front of neighbors was now locked out of the very place she called her kingdom. When she spotted me, she marched over heels, clacking on the pavement. "You can't do this," she shouted. "You're trespassing on HOA property." I simply handed her a folded document, the official termination notice stamped and notarized. "Read the last line," I said. Her lips moved silently. "All authority heretofore granted to Seadrift Homeowners Association is hereby rescinded by the property owner." She looked up, eyes wide. "This is impossible. You can't." "I can," I said softly. And I did. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came. Behind her, the wind tugged at the fallen banner from last week's party, the fabric rippling before sinking into the water. That's when I realized something profound. She wasn't my enemy anymore. She was just a symptom of a disease that spreads when good people stop paying attention. I had spent years trusting others to protect what I built. I'd handed over control for convenience. And convenience, I'd learned, was the silent killer of ownership. Victoria would fight, of course. People like her always did. But this time she was fighting gravity itself. And gravity always wins. The tide had turned. By the next morning, Seadrift Cove was whispering like a hive of hornets. News of the locked marina spread faster than salt spray in a gale. Half the residents were confused, the other half terrified. And in the middle of it all, Victoria Crane was melting down publicly. I watched her from my porch through the binoculars, pacing by the clubhouse, barking into her phone, hair coming undone from its perfect bun. She wasn't wearing her usual designer blazer today. She looked smaller, exposed. But power addicts rarely know when to quit. They just shift tactics. That afternoon, I discovered her new move. A fresh envelope landed in my mailbox, this time hand, delivered and marked urgent. Inside was a cease and desist letter printed on legal-style paper from something called Law Office of Hensley and Crane. The firm didn't exist. I checked the State Bar Registry within minutes. It was pure theater. The letter accused me of tortious interference, illegal seizure of HOA property, and emotional damages resulting from harassment of an elected official. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. But then I stopped laughing. Because this wasn't about the letter, it was about the story she was telling. I knew the type when cornered bullies rewrite history and count on fear to carry the lie. If I didn't control the narrative soon, she'd drown the truth in rumor. I needed facts, undeniable, visible public facts. Mike Travers came over that evening with a flash drive. "Cap, you're gonna love this," he said, grinning. On the screen were 2 hours of HD footage from the night before Victoria, breaking into the Marina breaker box with a crowbar. She looked like a raccoon with rage issues. The footage was crystal clear, date, time, face, everything. She was trying to kill the power to the dock, Mike explained. Would have fried half the boat lifts if she'd succeeded. "Good work," I said. "You just earned yourself dinner at the steakhouse." We backed up the footage to 3 separate drives, one for me, one for Evan, and one for the police. I called the county sheriff's office that night. The deputy who answered sounded skeptical until I mentioned I had high-definition proof of property tampering and trespass. His tone shifted fast. "Mr. Hale," he said, "we'll send a patrol by within the hour." When the cruiser rolled up, I met the officers at the gate. They watched the video once and didn't need to ask another question. "She was caught red-handed," one said. "You want to press charges, I want to enforce the law," I said simply. "Same as always." They nodded, filed the report, and left. Less than an hour later, their body cams captured the most satisfying scene I'd witnessed in years: Victoria Crane in a navy tracksuit shouting and flailing as she was led to the back of the patrol car. Word spread across the neighborhood like wildfire. Someone uploaded the arrest footage to the Seadrift community Facebook page before dawn. By breakfast, it had over 10,000 views. Comments poured in, I knew she was trouble. Finally, justice, the HOA's gone too far. For the first time in months, the tide of fear began to ebb. The following afternoon, I received a knock on my door. It was Donna Chang from Baystar Management, the same woman who had dismissed me with corporate politeness a week ago. This time, her tone was different. Gone was the calm professionalism. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. Mr. Hale, she began, I wanted to speak with you in person. Baystar has terminated our contract with the Seadrift HOA effective immediately. Really, I said, motioning her inside. Why the sudden courage? She hesitated. We received a police report, and the county clerk confirmed the lease termination you filed. Our legal department reviewed everything. To be blunt, we don't want to be named in any of this. I poured her a cup of coffee. Smart move. You were almost accomplices to fraud. She winced. Honestly, we thought Crane was eccentric, not criminal. Eccentric doesn't forge documents or trespass at midnight, I said. She nodded stiffly. We'll cooperate fully with your attorney. We'd like this resolved quietly. Quiet is fine, I said, but it won't be silent. When she left, I called Evan. The management company's out, I told him. He chuckled. Then the Queen just lost her army. That night, I sat on the dock for the first time in weeks. The water lapped softly against the pilings. The air smelled of cedar and salt again, not cheap perfume. I felt Anna's presence in every creak of the boards. She'd loved this place, the quiet dignity of it. I thought of Maya too, how she'd clutched my hand that day, terrified by the chaos. She was brave, stronger than most adults I knew. I wanted her to see that bullies can fall, that decency can win if you fight long enough. The next morning, I got an email from the county courthouse, State v. Crane preliminary hearing scheduled. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying to Evan with 2 words. We proceed. Still, I knew one arrest wouldn't fix the damage. The community was fractured. Neighbors avoided each other, unsure whom to trust. The HOA's poisonous rulebook still hung in the clubhouse, laminated and bold. It was time to reclaim more than land. It was time to reclaim trust. I printed fresh notices, simple and clear. Community gathering Saturday, 4 p.m., Seadrift Clubhouse. Hosted by property owner. No HOA, no titles, no drama, just neighbors. When Saturday came, I expected maybe a dozen people. More than 50 showed up. Some brought kids. Others came out of curiosity. Even the Rodriguezes, whose boat had been towed, came carrying a tray of empanadas. I stood at the front, hands clasped, and spoke the truth. No anger, no theatrics, just facts. I showed copies of the deed, the lease termination, and the police report. I told them how I'd bought the HOA's debt through Harborlight Holdings, how the land beneath every brick still belonged to the community, not the bureaucracy that hijacked it. For the first time, people listened, not with suspicion, with relief. Then old Bill Anderson stood up from the back. His voice was gravelly but strong. Jonah, he said, we've all been waiting for someone to do what you just did. We're tired of being ruled by fear. What do we do now? I looked around the room at the families, the veterans, the retirees, the same people who'd been silenced by one woman's tyranny. We build something better, I said. No HOA, no titles, just a co-op, transparent, local, neighbor to neighbor. If we maintain it ourselves, we'll never need another Karen. The applause was soft at first, then grew into a wave that filled the room. For the first time since this war began, the sound wasn't of conflict, it was of community. That evening, I walked Maya down to the pier. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and rose. She looked out at the water, her hair glowing in the light. Grandpa, she said quietly, is the bad lady gone now? Almost, I said, smiling. But even bad storms leave lessons behind. She tilted her head. Like what? Like how to build stronger docks, I said. She giggled, wrapping her arms around my waist. I like our dock. It's the prettiest one. I looked out across the bay, calm, steady hours again. For the first time in months, I felt peace without caution. But in the distance, I knew the storm hadn't vanished completely. Somewhere beyond those calm waves, Victoria Crane was stewing, plotting one last desperate move. Because people like her don't fade quietly. They sink, but not before thrashing. And I was ready for the splash. The peace didn't last long. Bullies rarely drown without making noise, and Victoria Crane was no exception. Within a week of her arrest, she had somehow managed to post bail and return to Seadrift Cove. The moment her feet hit the sidewalk, she was back to doing what she did best, lying loudly. By Monday morning, new flyers appeared on every door and mailbox. This time, they were printed in black and gold instead of the usual HOA blue. Across the top, in bold letters, Community Alert Hostile Takeover by Outside Investor. Beneath the headline was a grainy photo of me shaking hands with Donna Chang from Baystar, the meeting where she'd resigned from the management contract. The caption twisted the truth beyond recognition. Local speculator Jonah Hale conspires with corporate agents to seize control of Seadrift Cove. Residents beware. I could almost admire the audacity. Even facing criminal charges, she was still trying to frame herself as the victim and me as the villain. The problem was, lies have wings in small communities, and fear is their wind. That afternoon I got a call from Bill Anderson. "Jonah, you'd better get down here," he said. "She's got a crowd outside the clubhouse again." I drove down in silence. My hands didn't shake, but my jaw was tight. When I arrived, maybe 20 people were gathered around Victoria. She stood on the steps like a preacher at a revival, her voice sharp and righteous. "They want to privatize our homes," she shouted. "Turn our neighborhood into a corporate Marina playground. You think this man cares about your property? He wants your dues, your land, your future." Her voice cracked with theatrical desperation. I recognized the tactic, emotional chaos disguised as leadership, the same tone she'd used when she'd waved her fake rulebook in my face months ago. I walked straight up the steps and faced her. The crowd fell silent. "Victoria," I said evenly, "I care about the truth. And the truth is printed right here." I held up a folder. "These are county records proving I've owned this land for 18 years. These are court filings showing you're charged with trespassing and property tampering. And this," I held up the third paper, "is your own signature on a fraudulent board meeting that reclassified my marina as common property. 2 people voted on that, one of them your best friend. That's not democracy, that's delusion." Her lips trembled, but she forced a smirk. "You think paperwork scares people, Jonah? You think a few stamps make you the king of Seadrift?" "No," I said, "but they make you accountable." The murmurs began immediately. A few of her former allies exchanged uncertain glances. One man near the front, a realtor named Jacobs, spoke up. "Is that true, Victoria? You held a board meeting with just 2 people." She didn't answer. She tried to pivot to shout about corruption and land barons, but the energy had shifted. The crowd wasn't angry anymore, they were ashamed. I didn't stay to gloat. I just turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear her shouting at Jacobs, her voice cracking as her authority evaporated. By the time I reached the dock, the sound of the waves had drowned her out completely. The next day, Evan called. "She's running out of road," he said. "The DA's office is filing formal charges, but there's something else you should know." He forwarded me a copy of a new filing, this time from Victoria's attorney, which turned out to be her nephew, a law student who wasn't even licensed to practice. They'd submitted a motion claiming that my purchase of the HOA loan through Harborlight Holdings constituted predatory acquisition. It was nonsense, legally incoherent, but it was enough to stall the civil process for a few weeks. "That's fine," I said. "The longer she fights, the more rope she gives herself." Still, I couldn't ignore the damage. The neighborhood was split down the middle. Half the residents supported me. The other half were too confused or too scared to take a side. The HOA had been their world for years. To them, losing it felt like losing order. So I decided to give them something better. That weekend, I hosted a town restoration workshop at the clubhouse, same room where she'd once ruled every meeting. This time, the chairs were in a circle, not rows. No podium, no gavel, no titles, just neighbors. We talked about real things, replacing damaged dock lights, repainting the seawall, creating a shared maintenance fund. Mike volunteered to lead a safety inspection team. Bill offered to organize a veterans mentorship group for local kids. One by one, people started talking about what they could do, not what they could control. By the end of the meeting, we had the skeleton of a cooperative charter, a new beginning built on accountability, not authority. I printed a draft that night and pinned it to the old HOA bulletin board, right over Victoria's laminated rules. The next morning, someone had written 3 words across it, in thick marker, "Finally makes sense." A few days later, the sheriff came by with an update. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. Crane's lawyer withdrew. Judge denied her motion. "She's looking at fines, probation, maybe even a restraining order." "Good," I said, "but she'll still try something." He nodded. "She might. But this community's watching her now." And he was right. The same people who once whispered behind their curtains now walked the streets again, chatting, mowing lawns, sharing food. The fear that had hung over Seadrift like fog was finally lifting. That night I found Maya sitting by the window sketching the aurora in her notebook. "Grandpa," she said, without looking up, "is the mean lady gone for good?" Almost I said. "She's learning what happens when you build your house on someone else's dock." She giggled. "That's funny. It's also true." I tucked her into bed, then walked out to the porch. The moonlight shimmered across the marina, silver and clean. For the first time, there were no party lights, no unauthorized banners, no strangers clinking glasses on my deck. Just the soft rhythm of the waves and the faint hum of the night. But peace, I knew, was like the tide, it needed maintenance. So the next morning I met with Evan at the county recorder's office. Together, we filed a final amendment to the property trust that placed Seadrift Marina under the Hale Family Conservancy, a permanent, legally protected entity. No future HOA, no opportunist could ever seize it again without our consent. Evan smiled as we left the building. You know, Jonah, most people your age would have just sold and sailed away. I shrugged. Most people haven't watched their wife varnish a dock plank by plank. This place isn't real estate, Evan. It's memory. He nodded. Then, it's safe now. Later that week, a moving truck appeared in front of Victoria's house. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. Bill Anderson told me later that she'd sold the property at a loss and moved inland to get away from the humidity. The irony made me smile. A few days after she left, Maya and I took the Aurora out for the first time since that awful day. The water was calm, the sky clear. Halfway across the bay, a pod of dolphins surfaced alongside us. Maya squealed, leaning over the railing to watch them. I felt the wind on my face and the weight lift from my shoulders. She turned to me and said, "Grandpa, we kept the promise, didn't we?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We finally did." As the sun dropped behind the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the fear, the endless paperwork, and the quiet victory that followed. Victoria Crane had tried to rewrite ownership, but the truth of a place, like the truth of a man, doesn't come from what's printed on paper. It comes from what you build, protect, and refuse to surrender. And this time, Seadrift Cove was ours again. The following month felt almost strange in its calm. For the first time in years, Seadrift Cove sounded like what it was supposed to be, a neighborhood, not a battlefield. The only shouting now came from kids playing tag near the seawall. Even the gulls seemed quieter. Still, the quiet made me uneasy. When you've lived through enough storms, silence doesn't always sound like peace. It sounds like preparation. Victoria Crane was gone, but her shadow lingered in the distrust in the paperwork, in the way neighbors still hesitated before speaking freely. People had lived under her rule for too long, conditioned to ask permission before doing what was always their right. I understood that kind of fear. It takes time to wash out. One Tuesday morning, Mike Travers stopped by with his usual thermos of burnt coffee. "Cap, I think you should see this," he said, handing me his tablet. On the screen was a link to a local news site. The headline hit like a cold slap. Former HOA Vice President claims wrongful eviction, threatens lawsuit. The article featured a photo of Victoria standing outside a courthouse, chin lifted, talking to a reporter with all the fake grace she could muster. Her hair was darker, now styled to look serious, respectable, but her eyes, those sharp, vindictive eyes, hadn't changed. She was claiming emotional trauma, lost reputation, community displacement. Her statement read like fiction written by a narcissist with a thesaurus. Mike frowned. "Think she's got a case?" I shook my head. "She's got desperation, not a case." Still, I forwarded the article to Evan. He called that evening. "Jonah, it's nothing to worry about," he said. "Her claim has no legal ground. But be prepared for noise. She might try the press, since the courts won't listen." He was right. Within days, the noise began. Anonymous blog posts, social media threads, rumors about a greedy landlord who tricked the HOA out of their homes. I even received 2 letters from local activists asking me to explain the ethical side of property repossession. It was absurd, like watching a ghost whisper from the fog. But ghosts only haunt if you let them. So I did something Victoria never expected. I invited the press in. On a bright Saturday afternoon, we held an open house at the Marina, not to boast, but to show the truth. We displayed the deed, the master lease, the termination papers. We gave tours of the newly restored docks, the safety upgrades Mike had installed, the co-op management board that now handled maintenance transparently. Every cent collected, every expense paid, visible to all. The reporters were skeptical at first. One young woman from Channel 9 asked bluntly, "Mr. Hale, some say you orchestrated a corporate-style takeover. What do you say to that?" I smiled. "A takeover implies theft," I said. "What happened here was reclamation. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine. I just stopped others from taking it again." Another asked, "And what about Miss Crane? She says she was defending the community." "She was defending control," I replied. "The community didn't need control. It needed clarity." When the news aired that evening, the tone surprised me. They didn't paint me as a villain or a hero, just a man cleaning up a mess that never should have happened. And that was enough. That night, as I walked the dock, I saw Bill Anderson sitting by his boat polishing brass fittings. "Evening, Captain," he said. "Looks like the tide's turned for good." Almost, I said, sitting beside him. "There's still work to do." He chuckled. "You always say that." "Because it's true." I looked around the marina lights, reflecting off the calm water, Maya's laughter echoing faintly from the house. Places like this don't stay peaceful by accident. You have to tend them like gardens or marriages. Bill nodded. Or flagpoles. We both laughed softly. Then he grew serious. You ever think about what drives people like her? The Karens of the world? I considered that for a moment. Power without purpose, I said finally. They confuse control with contribution. They think order means obedience when it really means respect. He stared out at the horizon. Guess she learned that the hard way. Guess we all did, I said. The next week brought the final blow in the Crane saga. The county court dismissed her wrongful eviction suit before it ever reached a hearing. The judge's statement was short and brutal. Petitioner demonstrates no ownership or legal right of management over the property in question. Motion denied with prejudice. Evan called me laughing. Jonah, she just got bench slapped so hard they'll teach it in law school. But the victory didn't feel like gloating. It felt like closure. The following Saturday, I called for a community meeting, the first official gathering under our new co-op. No agendas, no scripts, no inflated titles. Just the people of Seadrift Cove sitting together like neighbors again. Friends, I began standing near the old wooden lectern we'd salvaged from the HOA storage room. We've lived through quite a storm, but storms have a way of washing things clean. From now on, no one here will ever rule by fear. No more fake covenants, no hidden clauses, no fines for garden gnomes. We're not a corporation, we're a community. Applause rippled across the room. I held up a small plaque, engraved with the new cooperative motto, respect over rules, neighbors over titles. Mike stepped forward with a grin. That's better than HOA bylaws. Shorter too, I said. Bill raised his hand. How about we make it official? Vote right now. This plaque replaces every old HOA sign in the neighborhood. The motion passed unanimously. Someone even started clapping in rhythm. For the first time in years, it didn't sound forced. After the meeting, Maya ran up to me, her cheeks flushed from excitement. Grandpa, did you hear them cheering? They were happy? I knelt down and smiled. That's what happens when people remember they're on the same side. Can I help with the signs? She asked. Of course, I said. You get to hang the first one. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she helped Mike screw the new plaque onto the marina gate. The metal gleamed in the fading light, respect over rules, neighbors over titles. She stepped back, beaming. Looks perfect. It is, I said quietly. Later that night, I sat alone on the deck of the Aurora, watching the moonlight ripple over the water. The world was quiet again, the way Anna had loved it. I could almost hear her voice in the wind teasing me about how dramatic I'd made things. You could have just retired quietly, she would have said. But the truth is, some battles choose you. You don't fight them for glory, you fight them so that others don't have to. Maya came out barefoot, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. She sat beside me, her head against my arm. Grandpa, she whispered, do you think people like her will ever stop? I looked at the stars. No, I said, but we'll always be ready for them. Because in every neighborhood, every dock, every cul-de-sac across America, there's a Victoria Crane waiting to rise, and there must be someone willing to stand firm, paperwork in hand, heart steady, voice calm. That's not just property law. That's principle. And Seadrift Cove had finally learned both. 2 months later, the marina had never looked better. The co-op ran smoother than any HOA ever did, because it wasn't built on fear. It was built on sweat and trust. Every Saturday, families came out to paint the dock rails, trim the hedges, or plant new flowers near the seawall. The same people who once avoided eye contact in the grocery store were now grilling burgers together, sharing tools, and swapping stories. But peace doesn't erase memory. And sometimes memory comes back in strange ways. One quiet morning, as I was sanding the Aurora's railing, Mike came jogging down the pier, his face pale. Cap, he said, catching his breath, you need to see this. He handed me his phone. It was a screenshot from a Facebook group called Coastal Property Watchdogs. The top post showed an image of our marina, our exact pier, accompanied by a furious caption. Elderly landlord exploits loopholes to steal community property, locals demand justice. The author's name was familiar, Victoria Crane, now using the handle at Truth Seeker Cove. My chest tightened, not in fear, but irritation. The woman was relentless. I thought she'd left the county for good, but here she was, trying to resurrect herself online like a digital ghost. She's posting old pictures, Mike said, claiming the co-op is some private club. She's tagging reporters again. I took a long breath. Let her. Facts don't need hashtags. Still, by that evening, local media outlets started calling again. Some wanted comments, others wanted controversy. One reporter asked if I'd respond to allegations of senior manipulation. I almost laughed out loud. Evan called the next day. She's trying to bait you, Jonah, he warned. Don't engage directly. She wants another spotlight. The best way to bury a narcissist is with silence and competence. So that's what we did. We kept working. Over the next week, our co-op board, 7 volunteers, including Bill Mike and a retired nurse named Carla, organized a Marina open day. We invited the public, including local press, to see exactly what Seadrift Cove had become. No speeches, no drama, just reality. On the morning of the event, the sun shone so clear it felt symbolic. The air smelled of salt and fresh paint. Maya had decorated the welcome banner herself, Seadrift Co-op Open, Water Open Hearts. Dozens of visitors arrived throughout the day. They saw the clean docks, the restored boathouse, the transparent budget pinned to the notice board. They met Bill, who proudly explained how every resident could now access maintenance records with a single click. They met Carla, who managed the shared community garden where herbs and tomatoes grew in recycled barrels. And they met me, just an old man sitting by his boat answering questions with calm honesty. One reporter asked Mr. Hale, "Do you regret taking on the HOA instead of selling and walking away?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said. Because if I had walked away, my granddaughter would have learned the wrong lesson that peace comes from avoiding conflict. It doesn't. Peace comes from facing it with reason. That quote made the front page the next day, not as scandal, but as inspiration. For the first time, Seadrift Cove wasn't the punchline of a suburban drama. It was an example. Of course, Victoria didn't like that. 2 nights later, around midnight, the motion sensor lights by the marina flicked on. I checked the camera feed from my phone. A lone figure was walking along the fence line. Even blurry, the posture was unmistakable, rigid, tense, self-righteous. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. "She's back," I said. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car rolled up. The officers found her standing by the locked gate, shouting at the sign that read "Private Property Resident Access Only." When they approached, she started reciting legal gibberish about citizen rights and public maritime zones. It didn't matter. She was trespassing again. They arrested her quietly this time, no handcuffs clicking, no shouting, just a quiet surrender. Maybe even she realized the fight was gone. The next morning, I received a call from the sheriff himself. "She's been charged with repeated trespass," he said. "Her attorney's negotiating a plea deal, community service therapy, maybe relocation." I thanked him and hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel victory. I felt pity. The truth about bullies is they're hollow inside. When the attention stops, they deflate. Weeks passed. The town grew quieter still. We replaced the last remnants of HOA signage with simple bronze plaques engraved with "Founded by the residents for the residents." The transformation was complete. That Friday, we held a celebration, nothing fancy, just a neighborhood potluck at sunset. Maya helped Carla hand out slices of blueberry pie. Mike manned the grill, and Bill told his usual half-true sea stories that made the kids giggle. I stood at the edge of the dock, looking out at the aurora. The sky blazed gold over the bay. For once, there was nothing left to defend, only something to preserve. Carla came up beside me, holding a glass of lemonade. "You know, Jonah," she said, "this place feels different now. Safer." "It's not just safer," I replied. "It's awake." She smiled. "You think that's permanent? Only if we keep it that way," I said. "Freedom isn't a lock, it's maintenance." She laughed, spoken like a man who spent too long fixing docks. "Or defending them," I said, smiling back. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked the marina one last time before bed. The air was still, the water glassy. I paused by the plaque at the gate, "Respect over rules, neighbors over titles." It wasn't just a motto anymore. It was proof that decency could outlast greed, that patience could defeat noise. I looked down the row of boats and saw the aurora reflecting the moonlight, proud and steady. She had survived storms, salt, and sabotage, and so had we. For a long moment, I stood there in silence, thinking of Anna, of all the years she'd poured into this place. "We did it, love," I whispered. "We brought it back." The wind shifted slightly, brushing against my face like a nod from somewhere unseen. I took one last deep breath of the salt air, the same scent that had once tasted like betrayal, and finally it smelled like home again. The next morning, Maya bounded onto the porch, hair messy from sleep, holding her sketchbook. She'd drawn the aurora under a banner of dolphins, leaping in sunlight. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "For Grandpa, who owns the ground and guards the peace." I smiled, feeling something warm and steady in my chest. Maybe one day she'd forget the details, the flyers, the shouting, the pink blazer, but she'd remember the lesson that calm isn't the absence of storms. It's the ability to rebuild after them. And for now, that was enough. Autumn came early to Seadrift Cove. The summer heat broke overnight, replaced by cool mornings and a soft mist that curled above the water. The air smelled of salt and cedar again, the scent I'd always associated with calm seas and homecomings. The neighborhood, once divided by paranoia and rumor, had turned into something I barely recognized: harmony. Every Saturday we gathered for maintenance day. The children painted fence posts, while their parents mended dock ropes or planted new flowers by the boathouse. The laughter that had vanished under the old HOA now echoed through every cul-de-sac. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up wondering what new rule would land in my mailbox. But even peace carries responsibility. When you've spent months fighting to reclaim something, you can't just set it down, you have to build it stronger than before. One afternoon I was in the co-op office, a repurposed corner of the clubhouse, reviewing our shared expenses, when Maya came skipping in her sketchbook under her arm. "Grandpa," she said breathlessly. "The dolphins are back." I followed her to the dock. Sure enough, 3 gray fins broke the surface near the Marina's mouth, gliding in perfect formation. A few families gathered to watch, cheering quietly. I stood behind Maya, one hand on her shoulder. For a moment it felt like life had come full circle. "Do you think Grandma can see them?" she asked softly. "I think she never left this place," I said. "She's part of it, the water, the wood, the wind." She smiled. "Then I'll draw her here too." That evening she sat on the deck sketching while the sky turned orange. I thought of Anna, of all she'd poured into this shore, and how the fight to reclaim it wasn't just about ownership. It was about memory, the kind that refuses to be rewritten by greed or arrogance. A few days later, Evan drove up from Monterey. We sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee and going over the final filings. The Seadrift Co-op was now officially recorded with the state, a nonprofit resident-managed entity. The property itself, still under the Hale Family Conservancy, could never again be annexed by an HOA or third-party corporation without unanimous community consent. Jonah Evans said, flipping through the documents, "You've done something rare here. Most people who get burned by HOAs either move or give up. You didn't." I shrugged. Couldn't. This place wasn't just dirt and docks, it was a promise. And promises mean something. He smiled. "Your wife would have been proud." I looked out the window toward the water. "She already is." He packed up his briefcase, paused at the door, and said, "You know, you've become something of a local legend. There's even a homeowners forum online quoting your case as an example of property rights done right." I laughed. "Great. Next thing you know, they'll start calling me Captain HOA. Could be worse," he said. "They could call you Karen." We both laughed until tears formed in our eyes. That weekend, the co-op held its first annual Neighbors Feast. No gala, no speeches, no velvet ropes, just long picnic tables lined along the marina. Bill Anderson grilled fish, while Carla organized a raffle for boat cleaning kits. Mike Ever, the prankster, hung a banner that read, "Warning, HOA free zone, happiness may occur." As dusk fell, string lights twinkled above the dock, and the smell of grilled corn and sea breeze mixed into something unforgettable. Maya sat on my lap, tired but smiling, as the neighbors clinked glasses and shared stories. Bill raised his beer. To the man who took back the shore, everyone cheered, but I shook my head. "To the people who stood with me," I said. "No one wins a storm alone." The clapping that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, real. When the laughter quieted, I stood and walked to the end of the dock. The sea was black glass beneath the moon. I'd spent months bracing for war, and now all that vigilance had nowhere to go. I felt almost weightless. That's when I noticed the plaque we'd installed months ago, Anna's Pier. The metal had begun to patina, glowing softly under the string lights. I ran my hand over it and whispered, "We did it, love. We kept your shore safe." The next morning, the mailman dropped off a thick envelope. Inside was a letter from the county court, final judgment. Crane v. Hale, case dismissed with prejudice. Attached was a note from the judge himself, "Mr. Hale, your documentation was immaculate. Property rights are upheld. Justice served." I set the paper down and laughed out loud. It was over, really over this time. No appeals, no more forged letters, no more pink blazers at my gate. When Maya came in from the yard, I handed her the letter. "What's this?" she asked. "It's proof that truth wins slower than lies," I said, "but it still wins." She hugged me tight. "Then we can finally rest." "For a while," I said. "Until someone else tries something dumb." She giggled. "Then we'll fight again. That's my girl." In the weeks that followed, life found its rhythm. Evan's firm helped me publish a short article about the legal lessons from Seadrift, a guide for homeowners dealing with corrupt HOAs. It spread across the internet faster than I expected. Emails poured in from strangers, veterans, retirees, single parents thanking me for showing that even small people can push back against big systems. One message stuck with me. It came from a man in Texas who wrote, "My HOA tried to fine me for flying a flag. They said it violated community aesthetics. After hearing your story, I printed your motto on a sign, respect over rules." They backed off. I smiled reading that. Maybe our little corner of California had started something bigger. On the first calm evening of November, I took the Aurora out one last time before winter. The sea was mirror still. Maya wore her red scarf standing beside me at the helm. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" "Nowhere special," I said. "Just forward." We passed the outer buoy where the coastline faded into silver mist. The gulls followed for a while, then drifted off. The only sound was the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic splash of water. "Do you ever miss when it was loud?" Maya asked. "Not the noise," I said, "but maybe the purpose. Fighting gives you focus. Peace gives you space to think." She nodded. "Then what do you want to think about now?" I looked at the horizon where the sun dipped low, setting fire to the waves. "About what comes next," I said, "and how to make sure no one ever forgets what we built here." When we docked again, the lights of Seadrift Cove glowed behind us, soft, steady, human. Bill waved from his porch. Carla's garden lights blinked on. Mike's radio played faint country music across the bay. It was home, not just mine, ours. As I tied the ropes, I glanced at the Aurora's nameplate. The gold lettering caught the last trace of daylight, gleaming like something alive. I realized the boat wasn't just a vessel. It was a witness to every storm we'd survived. Maya yawned and leaned against me. "Grandpa," she murmured, "are we done now?" I smiled. "We're never done, sweetheart. But for tonight, we can rest." What happened at Seadrift Cove wasn't just about a yacht or an HOA. It was about the quiet war between control and character. Power without integrity always collapses. It just takes time. Real ownership isn't a title deed, it's the responsibility to protect what's right even when no one else will. If this story taught me anything, it's that peace isn't granted by authority. It's earned by courage, honesty, and persistence. Whether it's your home, your family, or your own dignity, never let someone convince you it belongs to them. And if you ever face your own HOA Karen, remember this: storms don't last forever, but the ground you stand on is yours to defend. Watch until the end, because truth has a way of surfacing just like the tide.